This one sure as hell don't drag. It's Dragon Attack. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to PLD Projects Presents Crown Jewels. I'm your host, PLD, and this, as always, is the podcast where I take you on a journey with me through the entirety of the Queen catalog, song by song, as we try to listen to every version of every song that's out there and figure out what is the best version, or Crown Jewel version, and slide it into our ultimate playlist. A little bit of notes, a little bit of quotes, a little bit of listening, and a little bit of conversation. This week's song is The Great Dragon Attack, written by Brian May, a hard rockin' anthem if there ever was one. But before I get there, or I get into the song itself, I do have to admit I made a boo-boo. I made an error last week. More of an error of omission than anything else. During last week's episode where I talked about Play the Game, I talked about the many different versions we had, and I definitely came up with the best version that I thought possible. But I did neglect to mention one version. Luckily, it's not a version I've actually ever heard or can hear, or I don't know anyone who has heard it. So it doesn't affect the Crown Jewel portion at all. Crown Jewel stays the same, nothing changes, but I do want to let you know about one version that does exist. Now, according to the official Queen fan club magazine, as well as producer Mack, who produced the game, there does exist a version of Play the Game featuring Andy Gibb, at least on the first verse. Andy Gibb was the younger brother of Barry, Robin, or Maurice Gibb, better known as the Bee Gees. This has not been heard from anybody that I know. In fact, many people actually doubted its existence, but the fan club says it, and Max says it exists. I think it must exist somewhere. But that's it. I don't know anything else about it, so I can't really say anything more than that. So before we get into this week's episode, hit that like, hit that subscribe. Do me a favor, if you're on Spotify or Apple, give us that 5-star rating. Help me battle the everlasting algorithm as we try to get this out there to more people, get a community together on patreon.com/PLD Projects, or even just on the YouTube page if you can't do it. Comments, anything will help. I appreciate that as always. All right, but let's move on now to Dragon Attack, written by Brian May, featuring Freddie Mercury on lead and backing vocals, Brian May on guitar and backing vocals, John Deacon on the bass guitar, Roger Taylor on drums, percussion, and backing vocals. How many versions we have to listen to today? Well, we have the album version. There's a South African single version. There's a Mexican promo edit that exists, but I do not have and have never heard, but we'll talk about what we do know about it. There is the 1991 Hollywood remix by R.A.K. and Jack Benson. There is the David Ogilvy remix, also from 1991. There is a convention demo. You know how I feel about those, but we'll talk about it. There's also a couple of officially released live versions from Rocks Montreal, as well as On Fire at the Bowl, which is Rocks Montreal 1981, one of my favorite concerts of all time. On Fire at the Bowl, live at the Milton Keynes Bowl later that next year in 1982. And finally, live at Murrumbidgee Stadium in 1981. That was released as a bonus track down in South America. Great version there. Also got a couple of alternative live ones we're going to take a look at, listen to, because they involve the later efforts by the band. Not Brian and Roger's solo career, but we do have Queen and Paul Rodgers, Worcester, in 2006. And finally, Queen and Adam Lambert in Kiev in 2012. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'll give you a few notes before we listen to the album version, and then we'll talk about it. How do I do that? Look at the show notes. You're going to look at the show notes. In that show notes, there'll be a link to a Google Doc, which will have links to YouTube versions of all the songs we're going to listen to, if they exist. And then you'll click on that link. When I tell you to, you'll pause me, and you'll go listen to it, and you come back and you finish up the podcast, or you finish up the next section as we rinse and repeat and go through it. All right, we have the first one, of course, we're going to talk about now. This is the main version, the main track. It's a very rocking song, A lot of people put John Deacon's Another One Bites the Dust, a bass riff, as probably the most famous of the riffs on this album, and it's true. But I really like this one, and we're going to find out. It's a signal of Brian really trying to accommodate John and Freddie's more experimental side, I feel, while we're still grounding it in a more rock format. I know Freddie and John were starting to go a little bit outside that rock format. Brian was a little hesitant. Roger, not as hesitant as you would think. But definitely was Freddie and John more at the forefront of those activities. Brian tried to do those compromises, adding some nice blistering guitar to this one for sure. It was played live only really kind of in a medley format, not a medley per se, but they usually squeeze it in. They would do Now I'm Here, they do a little bit of vocal exercise, they do most of the song, then go back with the Now I'm Here reprise through about 1985, and then it was brought back for Queen and Paul Rodgers in 2006 after the first tour, and then again with Adam, and it was played sporadically throughout the Queen and Adam Lambert gigs. A few quotes before we listen to it and talk more specifically about it. John Deacon, 1982, it's my favorite song. That's good, John, saying that about a Brian track. I mean, I don't know if it was necessarily meant of the album or if it was all time. I'm betting it was his favorite song of the album. That's my guess. I think that John has a lot of other songs he would probably call his favorite song, but this is a good one for sure. Brian, 1984, it was done very late one night, probably to the morning, probably very, very drunk. They were definitely entering a time where the bar activities after the studio were just as important as the studio activities. A lot of drinking going on, a lot of partying, a lot of hedonistic ways between the bunch of them. Another quote from Roger Taylor in 1993, as a drummer you need a sense of time, a sense of rhythm, sort of inner clock that you really need naturally. You have to have aggression, and lastly I would say you definitely need stamina, but you do learn tricks. Apart from the fact that you develop more stamina, your muscles get more used to what's demanded of them. We used to do a song called Dragon Attack that was very hard on the right wrist. Brian also mentioned one last time in 2000 that it was put together in an unusual way. We just jammed for a while and put down the basic riff. All right, let's get into it. I really want to listen to it because I love this song. All right, let's get into it now. Hit that pause, go to those show notes, get to that Google Doc, get to that link, listen to the song, come back, and I'll tell you all about why I love it. And there you have it. What a great opener. Great thumping bass line, dulled by the guitar, that do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Funky, funky, funky. I got some great rhythm from Raj throughout. I got some great guitar power chords as Brian gets more into the song. And the vocal, it's like almost like a rap, really. It's attacking that mic. Freddie attacking the hell out of that mic. Using that rhythm to his advantage. It's some great lyrics, some fun lyrics. Of course, there's some lyrical references in there to Mack. Mack gets a name drop. There's also a reference to Taking Back to the Shack, which of course references the Sugar Shack, which was basically the hangout for the band. They would party hard, they'd wake up late, they'd get to the studio, do some work, and they'd run on back to the shack, where they would play their music actually through the sound system at the shack to see how it sounded. And we got a little bit more of this dry sound because of that. Wanted to have that kind of hit that space in between, which leads eventually, of course, to Hot Space, but that's the next album. We're not there yet. Well, technically the next full album. The Flash Gordon soundtrack did come in between. And we're definitely going to go through that, trust me, because I love that one as well. But I really love it in the middle when Raj breaks it down into John's bass on its own. Get some Freddie ad-libs in there. It kind of, the band is really tight sounding. They're playing off each other, and it goes right into one of my favorite Brian solos of all time, which is funny because it's not really a typical Brian solo. He mentioned before that he was drunk when he did it. He didn't take the kind of care that he usually does as far as, building up notes or making these orchestrated things. No, this was kind of just basically Brian cutting loose. It was a blistering solo. It felt hot. It cut loose. It's very crunchy sounding. Not typical Brian May. And I love typical Brian May too, don't get me wrong. But it was nice and interesting to hear him do a little something different. It's really definitely is a top-notch guitar solo for me from Brian. Now, after the solo, we get into one of the prototypical Queen-type choruses, vocal choruses, and I mean also in terms of almost a cappella sounding, the slow down, go down, and Brian and Freddie's playing off of that. The chorus builds and they add guitar, of course they add the bass, and then the full chorus, like, make my way. Very Queen, very awesome, very rocking, perfect. And then it ends, it's just a great jamming riff. It's just gonna go, they play off each other again. It hits hard, there's a few more Brian guitar solos, and it just kind of just do-do-do-do-do. Boom, ends like it was never there almost. It just kind of hits and goes. God, this is a great track, guys. This is a truly, truly wonderful track. Alrighty, let's get into the next version, the South African single version, we're going to call it. Go to the Google Doc, click on it, come back, we shall talk about it.
Take me to the room where the greens are green, and from what I've seen, it's a me.
There it is, the South African single version. That's something I actually hadn't heard of until recently. That's a recent discovery as far as I'm concerned. If you look at queenvault.com, that's a great website, great resource talking about Queen from the studio albums and the releases and all that jazz. Oh, no, this is the game. I know. I'm just kidding. This says that it was on a South Africa Rocket 7-inch acetate. Now, Rocket, Prime Jive, is the song we're going to listen to soon. It's a couple of episodes away, but I guess there was an acetate version, promo acetate, that was released in South Africa, and this edit of Dragon Attack is on the B-side. It's heavily edited, as you can tell. It's 2 minutes and 45 seconds when the regular version is about 4:18. Now, basically the entire bass solo, the guitar solo, they're all gone, and it really has an early fade out just to get to that, like, 2:45. This track wasn't discovered until 2015 when acetate was actually put on eBay for sale. Sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes the band doesn't even know. Sometimes these gems can just get thrown out there and we discover new and fun things. But it's okay for what it is. It's not horrible. It's not a horrible edit. It's actually pretty seamless when it comes to singles. Sort of like if you're not really listening to it, you might not notice, except for the fact that it goes very fast. It's more than I can say for some other single edits in the band's history. I'll tell you that. Considering we slice off almost half the song, and it's pretty seamless. It's not a bad idea. Not a bad thing, I should say. Right now, let me talk real quick before we move on. We'll talk about the Mexican promo edit. That's also, I know the information from that from Queen Vault. I have never heard it. I've never heard this at all, so maybe one day I will. This was about 3 minutes. It appeared on a vinyl promo of Dragon Attack, a 7-inch vinyl promo, and supposedly the song fades out shortly after the lyrics, "Low down, gotta make my way." Basically, it's, I guess, the same version till that moment, and then at that point, it just kind of fades out early. I don't know if I like that, but, it kind of misses that jam out session at the end, but I can't really say either way because I have not heard it. This might be a good time to talk about the convention demo, as I call it. It's actually an early instrumental demo, but if you haven't listened to the podcast before, basically, Greg Brooks, the official Queen archivist, and others, would visit various fan club conventions, and he'd play archive material as exclusives, which is very cool. Fans, however, would tape it, leak it out, etc., and Queen wasn't happy with that. So the way they got around it is that Greg would record a property of Queen Productions to play over the entire track pretty much on a loop. So it basically ruins anybody really trying to get a full version, unfortunately, for the fans there. And, also unfortunately for us who want to listen to it at all. But it basically was a instrumental demo for the most part. Some shouts, a little guitar work, and the Dragon Attack bass loop. And it was most likely from the jazz session, so very much an early instrumental demo for sure. All right, let's get into the next version that we're going to listen to and talk about. This is the remix by R.A.K. and Jack Benson, and this was released on the 1991 Hollywood Records remaster of the game as a bonus track. I mentioned that before quite a few times, that Hollywood, instead of releasing archive tracks or B-sides, they did a lot of remixes and dance remixes, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. If you want to appeal to the hardcore fan that already has the album, you got to entice them with stuff they're going to like. And Queen was never really a club dance kind of band, or at least their fans weren't. So I don't know what they're going for, but they decided to do it. Honestly, most of them are pretty terrible. But is this one? Well, take a listen and you tell me. Be back soon.
I'll tell you what you do.
It's a Dragon Attack.
And there you have it. What do you think? Well, I have an opinion that I'm sure would actually get me killed by many hardcore Queen fans. I'm sure they'd be shocked to hear this. In fact, this podcast might be shut down if anyone really listens to it. I actually like this version. I don't know why. I'm not usually into the dance remix kind of thing, but there's something kind of fun and funky about it. I do like the keyboard synthy openings and the spoken word that comes out. I'll tell you what you do. And had a kind of Freddie, they kind of repeated some effects on his voice. It's a Dragon Attack. It's got a little bit different bass riff. There's definitely some added percussion. It's actually kind of an interesting backbeat. I'd kind of think it's something that's worth listening to. It's very guitarless in the beginning. There does some kind of guitar later on, but they kind of strip out most of Brian's guitar. It's kind of a mono-like sounding guitar in the chorus. The drums are definitely pumped up for the breakdown, which I do like. I do like that. Mostly probably the worst part for everybody else is the rap they added. There's like, I don't even know who it is who's rapping. Maybe it's Jack Benson or R.I.K. who's doing the producing. I don't know if one of them actually added the rap. I don't have that information. I didn't hate it. I didn't hate it. I'm sure many will. I'm sure most Queen fans absolutely think it's pissing on a Picasso. But for whatever reason, I kind of dig it. I won't actually turn it off when it comes on. It does have some. It does. If I had some criticism to it, it does at the end start getting a little lesser. Without the riffs, it gets a little more repetitive. There's no jam out session. It's more produced. It's more production wise. So it gets a little repetitive, like I said. And the riffs on Freddie's voice, the effects on the it kind of gets a little tiring at the end. But at the end of the day, maybe it's a low bar because a lot of them are crap. I actually don't mind this one. But speaking of the 1991 remixes, there actually was another remix not released on the game, but was released on some promo issues that Hollywood Records had. David Ogilvy, which you'll hear about more again next week, he does another One Bites of Dust remix as well. He does a Dragon Attack remix. However, this is not really done like most of the 1991 remixes. I don't want to say anything else. I'll have you listen to it and you let me know. All right. Be back soon. And now you see what I mean. Really, it's just the album take with the vocals removed and some minor tweaks here and there. Got some extra echo on Brian's guitar at times. There's some effects on Rogers' drum during the breakdown, and the bass is kind of kicked up a little bit volume-wise in the mix. There's not a whole lot else different about it, though. It's almost just like a kind of a cool instrumental remix that it's actually pretty effective. Definitely much better than a lot of the dancier stuff they could do. So bravo for definitely not taking a piss on the Picasso with that one. All right, that'll do it for the studio efforts by the band. Let's move into the different live versions. We'll tackle the Queen with Freddie era first. There's actually 4 Queen with Freddie eras. I actually, when I was reading through it earlier, I mentioned the 3, I believe. We do have Rocks Montreal, On Fire at the Bowl, and Mentioned live at Murumbai Stadium in 1981. There's also a bonus track live at Cebu in Japan in 1982. So why don't you go listen to those 4 versions? If you'd like, you don't listen to one of them. They're all pretty similar in the same vein. You can pick and choose, but I will talk about the little differences that I've seen in between them, and then we'll go for more. All right. Be back soon. All right, let's talk about Montreal and Murumbai Stadium first, both from 1981. I'll start first with Rocks Montreal. I mean, it depends on kind of when you started. The YouTube versions do include the Freddie vocal. I mentioned before, a lot of times they started with Now I'm Here. They'd go into like a little bit of a vocal interplay. Freddie's famous doing his warm-ups with the audience. They break into Dragon Attack before going out to do Now I'm Here at the end. So you might get some of Freddie's vocals here. I think the YouTube does have Freddie's vocal interplay, which is fine. I think the Rocks Montreal CD did not have it that way. It's put into the earlier track, or the earlier track. But what about the actual performance? Tempo seems a smidge faster. Possibly just the adrenaline flowing. The band is very tight. For the most part. Freddie does fumble a little bit. He fumbles the words a little bit here, but definitely plows through like a champ. Make sure he gets through enough of it where he doesn't lose the plot, so to speak. This version might feature my favorite mix of John's bass. It's really on point. It's really crisp, and he does a great playthrough during this. It does skip Rogers' drum breakdown and goes right back into Brian's solo, I should say. Blistering solo again does really well, even when he's not drunk at this point. Does build with drums afterwards as they go back into the reprise of Now I'm Here. Murumbai, again, similar to Montreal in almost every aspect. Freddie feels a little more biting and aggressive in this version, but the mix is definitely better in Montreal, and no doubt because they've been through a lot with that mix. This is the concert that was released in IMAX format, of course. recently, even, which is a great time if you got a chance to see it. Awesome. If not, hopefully they'll bring it back around. Well, as far as the next version, we got On Fire at the Bowl in Milton Keynes in 82 and Live in Cebu in Japan in 82. A little different. Similar to Montreal still, the different setup they have. I mentioned it before. Roger has more electronic drum pads. There's a keyboard player. But this track in particular doesn't sound much different. In the On Fire at the Bowl version, there's some weirdness with Brian's guitar as Roger's drum builds into actually getting into the song. It kind of feels a little weird at times. But once they get into it and the tempo builds and builds, it actually seems a bit tighter than Montreal. Probably because they've been playing it longer at this point. But they do have, it's a great version of Brian in his version. Brian's guitar is really on point, and the band supporting him during the part is just really on point as well. Some great Freddie ad-libs during this version. It does finish up breaking back into Now I'm Here, just like the previous Montreal and Cebu version, or Montreal and Moranbah Stadium versions. The difference then in Cebu, during the Japan part of this tour, they actually inserted Put Out the Fire, which is from the Hot Space version. So it went from Now I'm Here to Put Out the Fire into Dragon Attack, and then goes out into Now I'm Here at the end again. And the other difference between Cebu, Brian's playing is a much more up in the mix during the beginning. John's bass is maybe turned down. I don't know if it's Brian up or John's down, but either way, Brian's definitely heard much more than the studio version and much more than the other versions as well. But overall, it's a great track live. It is edited down a little bit here and there, and it definitely, like I said, it's squeezed in the middle of the song, so it might be, it might be detrimental to the overall wanting to make it a crown jewel. But we'll have that discussion. But that's not happening yet because we have two more versions to listen to. Next up, we're going to listen to Paul Rodgers tackle the track. During the U.S. tour, he did not play it during the initial European tour, their first tour in 2005. They did in the U.S. tour, and we have a version from Worcester, Mass. Take a listen to that, and we'll come back and we'll talk about it. Just by the way, the YouTube version that you're going to listen to, it's actually 3 tracks. I believe I have it set up so it goes right to the point where you should start hearing Dragon Attack. If it doesn't, I apologize. Listen to it, come back, we'll talk about it. All right, now. All right, there you have it. The tempo, much slower. That's the first thing you definitely notice. I don't know if it's Brian Rodgers starting to advance in age a little bit, but it's much slower than it was in the 80s. This is obviously a bootleg, so it's kind of hard to tell, but the bass is really muddy in this mix. One of the better versions I heard. There's no official release for this version at all, unfortunately. Rodder does do the drum breakdown a little bit in this one, which I do dig. Danny Miranda, who is on bass during the Queen and Paul Rodgers era, does do the bass solo well. It's interesting also because it actually has an ending. Instead of breaking into Now I'm Here, we have a finishing up of the track, so that's kind of cool to hear. Those are the positives. Paul, he does a fine job of it, although I think this is less in his wheelhouse than some of the other Queen tracks. More than like Killer Queen would be for sure, but I feel like Freddie's a little more aggressive, a little more biting, and that's what you kind of need this song to be if it's going to work out like you want it to. It's not bad, but it definitely isn't. It was just nice to hear, I will say that. It was nice to hear they started, it was taking some new songs and putting them in the set list, songs like this, which we hadn't heard for quite a long time. So I'm glad they did it, but overall, there's definitely better Queen and Paul Rodgers songs. Alrighty, we got one more left to listen to now. This is Queen and Adam Lambert, the first full gig they ever played together in Kiev in 2012. That's a professionally shot song, so it's a good mix for sure. They do different versions of it, kind of different versions of it throughout the tours, but not like extensively different enough that you want to have to hear different tour versions of them. We'll start with Kiev as the one that's the most officially released version we have. Hit that link. Listen to it. I'll come back and talk about it. All right, there you have it. Also a slower tempo, maybe even more slow than the Queen and Paul Rodgers. It's close. Brian and Roger are definitely advancing more in age at this point, so that could be part of it. But it almost feels like it was done purposefully for Adam. Adam definitely makes it slinkier and more seductive rather than biting sounding, which is an interesting choice. Definitely fits him more because he's not the aggressive biting song. In fact, I feel it is a bit tough for Adam to sing tough in a way. It sounds a bit like, honestly, as much as I'm going to get killed by the Lambert fans here. I know they're very, very strong in their feelings, but I can't help but say it almost sounds like a kid trying to be tough. It's like that little, it's almost like Scrappy Doo at this point when he's trying to be intimidating. It just comes across not quite so much. So instead, he does it like slinkier and in his style more, which is fine. I do like the extra background. The backing band gets a little bit more involved. We have the extra background percussion from, in this case, it's Rufus Taylor, Roger's son. Later on, it ends up becoming Tyler Warren. They add some nice little, conga type percussion to it. It's really kind of cool. I did like the Roger 1, 2, 3, 4 into the guitar bit. When the guitar comes in, it's really powerful. I really thought that was good. The best part of this version is actually nothing to do with Brian or Roger or even Adam for that case. It's actually dealing with Neil Fairclough, who plays bass for Queen on Adam Lambert. What he does is quite cool. In this version, it's not even quite as cool as it gets. You should actually, if you really are interested, go to YouTube and see some of the bootleg versions that they do later on in this tour as we get closer, some in Hammersmith and even beyond. He starts it here, and what he does is during his bass solo, he's a Queen fan. He starts adding some really old school Queen bass riffs just to please the long-term fans like us. Son and Daughter was played. Fairy Feller's Masterstroke was played. He goes through a whole bunch of them at times. Death on Two Legs at one point, I believe. He just would start like throwing these random riffarama during his bass solo because he just wants to play them. Get Down, Make Love, I think, made an appearance at one point. I can't remember off the top of my head all of them, but he does go through a lot of cool bass riffs. And this one, it's definitely Son and Daughter and Fairy Feller's Masterstroke. It's really kind of a cool addition to it. It does go from there into a drum solo, so no finish for the band there, unfortunately. But the bass thing does make up for it, I think. I don't know. What do you think? And all right, listening party is over. We're now going to get into the ranking, finding the crown jewel, rating the track, and we're going to see if it slides into my top 10 Queen-related tracks of all time so far. It's an ongoing process as we go through these tracks. I add things to the list as they happen. Of course, now on a scale of 1 to 11, everything is at 10.5 or higher, like I mentioned. But first, let's rate these songs as far as the crown jewels, figure out which is the crown jewel. I will list them, in my opinion, from lowest to best. The best, obviously, being the crown jewel itself. Let's get into it. My least favorite version of the ones we've listened to, the one that's definitely not making it, it's the Queen and Paul Rodgers version from Worcester. Part of it is the bootleg sound. Part of it is the slow tempo. Part of it is it's just not quite up there with anything else, unfortunately. I would even take, some of the remixes over that, unfortunately. Not my favorite Queen and Paul Rodgers thing for sure. Still like they played it, and still don't skip it when I listen to all my different Queen and Paul Rodgers concerts I have. But yeah, this is not one of the best as far as, if I'm picking the crown jewel of Dragon Attack, it's not going to be this one. Okay, next up from there, the Dave Ogilvy remix. It's hard putting this one here, I gotta be honest, because it's so well done, and it's really cool sounding. However, we're not looking for cool sounding, we're looking for the crown jewel, the best version. And the best version of Dragon Attack has vocals. Has Freddie mostly singing, or even rapping, as I said, kind of hitting those notes like that, or the powerful, hitting the beat with the voice. So, to have an instrumental version, very well done, very worth listening to. It's kind of cool to hear, but it's not going to be a crown jewel. Next up from there, the South African edit. The only reason it's above the Ogilvy remix, honestly, is the fact that it does have Freddie singing on it. Although it is a seamless edit. It is a seamless edit. So I will put it there, but if I'm going to hear this, I like the jam. I want to hear them jam out. This is a jam rock song, not a pop song, so let's hear it. Mexico promo edit. I'm going to assume the Mexico promo edit would be here as well, considering I haven't heard it. But from the description, it sounds similar to this, so this is probably where this would end as well. From there, this is where I put the 1991 remix, the R.A.K. and Jack Benson one. Yes, above the actual Freddie version, which is an edited version, so that's something to be said. But again, I like it. I dig it. I'm not nuts enough to put it over too many other versions, like the live version or the actual version, but I will listen to it and put a smile on my face. From there, that's where I put the Queen and Adam Lambert version. There's some things in it that are really cool. I do like the attempt to change it up a little bit since it is a different singer. Let's make it more their style, which is cool. However, it doesn't fit to me nearly as well as the original because that's how it was intended to play. So the best version's got to be the one that I like, and the slinkier version is not the best version. I know Adam Lambert fans really loved this version of Dragon Attack for him, and good for him. I'm happy they played it again. I love seeing it. I'd love to see it when they do, but again, we're looking for the best version. From there, Moranbah Stadium in 1981. Nothing special about it, that's all. Nothing really totally special about it. It's fine, but it's definitely got a bad, not as great of a mix as Rock Montreal and some of the other ones. That's why it's there. From there, it's Cebu from 1982. I'm not sure why I really put that one higher at this point. I guess that's just a gut feeling. There's not a whole lot difference. Again, we're talking infinitesimal differences now really between the versions here. I do like hearing Brian a little more, but I honestly could put Moranbah and Cebu back. I could switch them at any time, either way, honestly. But for now, I did initially. My gut said to put Cebu 82 here, so that's where I'm gonna put it. From there, Rock Montreal. The mix is spectacular. John's bass is awesome in it. This is almost my favorite version. There's only two versions after this, but that actually says it all. Even though this is a great mix and everything else, there's two versions I like just a smidge better. So what gets the do? Is it going to be the album version, or it's going to be On Fire at the Bowl? Well, I'll tell you. Next up, not the crown jewel, the runner-up. That's where I put On Fire at the Bowl from 1982's Milton Keynes. It's similar to Montreal. Again, it has a little bit of that weirdness like I mentioned. What's great about it is that Brian's guitar is on point. The band is tight. Some great Freddie ad-libs is really kind of fun. However, number one at the crown jewel is the album version, the original studio version for it. Why? Because it has the full song. It has the full beginning, the full breakdown section. It has that Brian guitar. Has some cool harmony vocals, too many overdubs to really do live that way, as far as the building crescendo of it as well. I love that jamming riff at the end. This is the perfect version of the song for me. This is, in fact, the crown jewel. All right, let's move on to the rating then. Like I said, we're looking for 1 to 11 because we always turn things up to 11 here on PLD Projects. I mentioned before, to make it into the top 10, you got to have at least a 10.5 and higher. We haven't been there in a while, folks, but we are going to be there today. Dragon Attack at the 10.5 for me, a near perfect score. Let's see where it does slide into my top 10 Queen-related tracks of all time so far. This is an ongoing thing. We are going to have number 10 be Teo Toriate from A Day at the Races. Number 9, In the Lap of the Gods Revisited from the Sheer Heart Attack album. Number 8, The Prophet Song from A Night at the Opera. And then at number 7, with a bullet, is Dragon Attack from the game at 10.5, sliding just underneath Don't Stop Me Now from the Jazz album. If you want to know the rest, Bohemian Rhapsody, number 5 at Night at the Opera. The March of the Black Queen from Queen 2 at number 4. White Queen, As It Began from Queen 2 at number 3. It's Late from News of the World at number 2. And finally, Somebody to Love, number 1 at A Day at the Races. And that's definitely the Montreal version, no doubt there. What a great, probably still that's going to be a tough one to beat, folks. That's going to be a very tough one to beat. But Dragon Attack at number 7, not a bad showing. Not a bad showing at all. All right, folks, that'll do it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening in. Next week's episode, well, it might be next week's episode. It actually might be 2 weeks from now because this is a big one. This is a big track. Another one bites the dust. As I mentioned before, the John Deacon classic, one of Queen's biggest songs of all time, probably might be their biggest hit in the U.S. Between that and Crazy Little Thing Called Love. And there's a lot of versions to get through, so it might take me a lot to gather it. Might take me a lot to listen through. So stick with me. We'll get there. But don't be surprised if I have to take an extra week on this one. Sometimes I just, when I have the 20-minute episode or the 10-minute episode, I can do it, no problem. When it gets to be up there of the hour or something to that vein, which this one might be, well, I might have to take that extra time. That's it this week, guys. You can join me at patreon.com/PLD Projects. Austin Cadell, Brandon Buckingham. Wonderful crew, so selfless, so giving. It really helps me keep the lights on. I'm hoping to do some more content, extra content, bonus content soon. Some more meetups. We haven't done any in a little bit. Been kind of tied up with a lot of real life stuff. Definitely going to get back to that though for sure. I really do appreciate you guys. Couldn't do it without you. Yeah, we will see you at next time with another one bites of dust. As always, take care. Get that dragon off your back. Get to the shack and go listen with Mac. Bye now.